With today's conversation, we are talking about large corporate gatherings when it comes to building a church of house churches. Jason, can you talk a little bit about why this was so important as you were building Church Project to do this? Because most house churches are just house churches. They don't have that large central gathering to them. And so where was that so important with Church Project?
Yeah. And as always, howdy, Nils. Always love you guiding through these conversations. And you're such a good dude. It's always fun to be around you. Thanks for your passion for the church. Yeah, I just got back from Central Asia, and pastors from all over Central Asia are doing house churches, but they're very isolated. They're very disconnected. And some of that by necessity, like some places where I was, they cannot have legally, they can't gather. I mean, I gathered with people illegally. It was sort of fun for me, but I was flying out. I mean, these people, this is their life. And so, but what we spent a lot of time talking about was the connectivity between house churches, because there's a lot of isolation, a lot of individualism. They don't have a lot of synergy. There's not authority or accountability or care for house church pastors. A house church pastor is generally alone in a lot of these places. So one of the things we spent a lot of time with pastors there talking about was the connectivity across house churches. And in some places, they are able to gather weekly. And I can tell you this, they want to. It's a wild thing in our context where we're free to gather together, like for a common worship gathering, and a lot of people elect not to. I can tell you that places around the world where people they can't do that. They really want to, though. They see the benefit of it. And we spent a lot of time talking about the benefits of the common Sunday gathering. For us, we are a church of house churches. We're a lot of individual house churches, but we do come together for a Sunday gathering. That's our commonality, really. We have no phone number, no office to walk into, no foyer, can't find staff. We're not accessible. You want to be cared for, you want to be in a community, you go straight to a house church. But all of our house churches and some people who aren't yet in house churches do come together for our Sunday gatherings. And I think it's crucial that we do that. And I know later on we'll talk into some of the reasons why it's so crucial. But, you look at the Bible, the Old Testament, there are a lot of times God's people got together in addition to, weekly at the synagogue or weekly at the tabernacle or whatever. And then in the New Testament, they were getting together on the regular. I mean, for the apostles' teaching, really gifted teachers were teaching people by the thousands. Then they had community and met each other's needs and discipled one another in house churches, but they were getting together by the thousands, and they were singing songs. They were being taught the scriptures. They were commonly corporately giving, and then they would give in house churches too for benevolent needs and things. So, and then in heaven, we're going to all be together doing a lot of singing, a lot of worship for the Lord. So, I mean, it's really hard here to argue biblically devaluing a common gathering.
Interesting. Well, and talk about maybe a little bit about the house churches themselves and the large gatherings from a practical standpoint. How do they complement themselves, and how do you differentiate those two experiences?
Perfect. Well, I mean, we say a Sunday gathering serves house church. House church is strengthened through Sunday gatherings. One, we're continuing to disciple all of our people through gifted, sound, solid biblical teaching that we do in all of our common corporate gatherings. One, we're able to have people who are gifted worship leaders. You see all throughout the Old Testament, people who would be like really gifted at leading worship. We have people who are gifted at that. You go to a house church, a lot of times when people are trying to have a moments of worship with the Lord, it's just not great in a lot of places. It just can't be, because there aren't that many talented people. I wouldn't be leading a great worship experience in a house church. And so there's things to do. And across our city, it's good for the body to come together and just be really encouraged that, wow, we have thousands of people connected in this church. I may be in a house church with dozens of people, but now I'm with hundreds in some churches, or thousands in the case of our church. And it's really encouraging. Also, we protect doctrine across house churches, partly through our Sunday gathering. I mean, we're going to have an exegetically, doctrinally sound sermon on a Sunday gathering from somebody who's been trusted by our elders to teach. And then And house churches, I mean, we're going to be really wrestling with that passage of scripture together. And it's going to be compared against the doctrinally sound sermon that was given on a Sunday. It also protects unity. We're all as a church moving along together. We're walking through the same passage of scripture together. And so we're still one church connected, and Sunday gatherings really help connect us. So they protect us doctrinally and they connect us as we're moving along through scripture.
Interesting. And I'm curious, Jason, how you maybe implement the sacraments between the two. Like, do you do communion in the large gatherings or in the house churches, or both, or baptism? What does that look like tangibly, maybe even from a differentiated standpoint?
Yeah, it's a both and. I mean, we, have a like communion available every Sunday in our gathering on response stations. Once a month, we have people serve communion. But then house church pastors at different times will do, communion in their house churches. We have corporate gatherings where we do baptisms, several times a year. And we just got finished with one. I think we had 50 baptisms one Sunday. It was awesome. And I love that because we, are sharing our story with thousands of people in baptisms. But sometimes people get baptized in a pool at a house church. And so we like that for the person because maybe otherwise they weren't going to be baptized here. We wish that the entire church beyond the house church would have been able to see it. But we're still grateful that somebody's getting baptized. So we're doing both and in house church. And the same with giving. We give corporately together, across our church. And through that, we support a lot of ministries. We're able to do some things as one big body. We can plant other churches. But then in house churches, there's giving going on, benevolent giving that the house church pastor oversees. And so we have no idea. We don't monitor that. We don't get reports on that. So it's a both and happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I'm curious, and I'm a marketer, at the core. And so as a marketing funnel, we often look at what is the first step to people's engagement with your organization, and what are their next steps. And typically in the church, that is go to the large corporate gatherings and then get connected into a small group. Well, in this model, it seems that maybe the house church is the first step, and then they come into the large corporate gatherings. I'm curious what your intention is from a first step standpoint in engagement with church project, and then what you're actually seeing. Do you see it maybe 50-50, or how do people then come into this house of house churches from a front door standpoint?
Yeah, well, our intention is that everybody comes here through a person, however they enter. And so that's why we don't do marketing. No, we've never done a mailer. We've never done a mall kiosk or a movie theater ad. And I'm not saying those things are bad, but you really protect the unity of your church when everybody who comes here has first had a conversation with someone who comes here about our church. And so, our hope is that everyone in our church is an evangelist, and we teach people to have good God gospel conversations, good conversations that turn into a God conversation, that turn into a gospel conversation. And a lot of times those conversations lead to inviting someone to church. That person may be more open to coming to a Sunday gathering first. That person may be more open to coming to a house church first. That person may be more open to go to serve at a ministry partnership first before they ever step into anything here. Sometimes that person's willing to get into a one-on-one discipleship relationship, for a while, a month or two, before they get into anything else. And so our intention really isn't what door they walk through, it's that they walk through a door with someone, whatever door they choose to walk through. And that's happened here. I mean, almost everybody we meet, they came here because somebody invited them. I met somebody last week. They just moved from California. Their neighbor goes to our church. Their neighbor invited them here. They first came on a Sunday. I met somebody not long ago. Somebody invited them to their house church, and that was their first entree into church project. Some people have been serving with us in ministries, and they've never been to Sunday gatherings or house churches. And so, we think all of these things are uniquely and distinctly beneficial for people if they gather into our church, if they go to house church, if they go to Sunday gathering, if they serve, if they're in discipleship. Those things are all really distinctly valuable. But the way in which somebody enters, we don't care where they enter first. We just want them to enter with someone.
What a great answer. I think it's hard for somebody, and I hope everyone listening to this is really, in tune to that and processing is that it is done through people. Whatever
Yeah.
that first step might be, and you're providing, two very distinct complementing experiences for people to enter the Church of House Churches, and if they start here, then they're going to move in this direction with the large gathering to the house church
Yeah.
gatherings versus the other way, and it can go either way. And I think that's not the norm in most
No.
churches today, but it is a
Yeah.
beautiful structure.
Well, I mean, I've definitely been a part of the funnel and the processes and the idea, and it generally works. I mean, we sort of get the way people generally work. I mean, sociologically, we sort of understand that. But at the end of the day, it really breaks down per person. And so
Yes.
I really don't want somebody coming here because they saw a commercial and they walked in and they don't know anybody. And I mean, I hope to catch them, right? I mean, somebody one time from Australia starting a movement of house churches there reached out to me and we talked. He said, "What's your approach to evangelism?" And I said, "It's evangelists. Like, I have at my disposal now thousands of people who could be evangelists in our city." And so, I mean, the same for marketers, if I wanted to say that or go there. But I mean, I have people who, if we turn our people into evangelists, which I think Jesus was trying to do with us, follow me, I will make you fishers of men. And so we got to keep our eye on this, that we are following Jesus, but also that would really result in, if we're following him and if Jesus is doing his job while we're following him, he's going to make us into fishers of men. And so when somebody's sitting with a coworker, that coworker may not be ready for a long time to walk into a big Sunday gathering. I mean, who knows their past, their experience, their thoughts about God. And so, I mean, we just want people to walk with people personally. I don't want you to walk through a process. I want you in a relationship with somebody here. So if you do come on a Sunday gathering and somehow you found out about us and you don't know anybody here, I'm talking immediately before you leave on Sunday, we've connected you to a house church, and we have your phone number. You have somebody that you're texting from our church, because we're immediately getting you into a personal relationship. We don't want to put you in a process. We want you in a personal relationship.
I love it. I love it. And Jason, I'll wrap up with this question. When you look at, from a leadership standpoint, your large corporate gatherings, we've talked about this with the house churches, but if you were to define the win, or you're saying this is working, our large corporate gatherings are doing what they're supposed to be doing, how are you determining that as the leader of this church of house churches?
Yeah, well, first, I looked at the things that God's called us to do, and are we doing those things in the way he called us to do that? So that's my first thing. What has God called us to do? For us, we know when we gather, we've already been told in Scripture what we do. I mean, I put it together and I alliterated it. Like, I call it our liturgy, although I never used that word growing up. I just know that means what we do and when we do it and how we do it on a Sunday. So we do singing because, of course, Scripture calls us to, and it's something very spiritual. Singing, we do scripture reading, like we have a public reading of Scripture separate from the passage that we're studying. It's just a beautiful, pure reading of Scripture. We do singing, Scripture, and we do silence. We have moments of silence. Scripture teaches us that even corporately, like Selah in the Psalms, pause and consider these things. We have minutes of silence in our gathering and meditating on Scripture. Singing, Scripture reading, silence. We do a story every week. I mean, the testimony of the saints, where people are sharing their story. Sometimes it's read, often it's video. And so we do a story, singing, silence, Scripture reading, story, and then a sermon. I mean, preach the word. And so we're supposed to be preaching the word. So first we look at, what has God called us to do? And are we doing that in the way that God calls us to do it? And then secondly, are these things affecting people? And the answer to both of those is, I think we're doing what God called us to do and the way he called us to do it. We're always making sure about that. And then, yeah, it's affecting people. I mean, we hear stories of how our Sunday gatherings are affecting people. People are encouraged to come. They want to come. They are coming. They're bringing people. They keep coming back. And so thankfully, we don't need to do 5 times as many Easter gatherings as we usually have, because our people are coming on the regular. Churches that have that, I'm like, where are your people last Sunday and next Sunday? You know, why do you need 5 times as many gatherings? I think you might have a problem. And so we have a lot of people who just keep coming on the regular because they love it. They're fed, they're encouraged. And and it's a great connectivity to house church. And so our house churches are strengthened by it, and we hear stories about that all the time. So really, our metrics are stories and rethinking and returning to the scripture to make sure we're doing what he told us to do there. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I would say that the summary of this conversation from my perspective is it returns right to the topic of this whole podcast is we need to rethink and return. And that's what you're doing. And I think you're identifying that very different metrics than what I think we've become accustomed to measuring success by. And I think you've laid out a beautiful model there. And I want to, just as we wrap up this podcast, I want to encourage everyone, if you haven't yet gotten on our email list, go to rethink and return podcast.com. Make sure you get on the email list for updates for new podcast episodes coming, and you'll get access to the show notes. One of the things you'll find in this episode is a link to what Jason mentioned earlier is goodgodgospel.com, where you can gain resources that can help your church learn how to create evangelist within your church. Jason, any additional feedback or thoughts when it comes to Good God Gospel that has been influential in your church and how other churches are beginning to use this model to help empower their congregation?
Well, our job as pastors, teachers, leaders in the church is to, like Paul told Timothy, discharge all the duties, and including being an evangelist. And so, at our church, at Church Project here in the Woodlands, we say everyone an evangelist. I mean, we want to all be an evangelist and fishers of men. And so we had to think of, years ago, I was thinking, I'm calling our people to do this, but I haven't equipped them with tools to do it, even language to do it. And so I'm frustrated that they're not, but they want to, I can tell. And so I came up with Good God Gospel. We just walk people through scripture, how to have good conversations that turn into God conversations, that turn into gospel conversations. And so now every week, maybe I can say without exaggeration, at least on the average, because sometimes many people will say, hey, I had a good conversation turn into a God conversation this week, or my long-standing God conversations finally got to a gospel conversation this week. Sometimes people will introduce me. Hey, this is the person that we've been having good God gospel conversations with. And so our people got the language. What I also knew was, hey, we've now taught our people sort of the process of having these conversations, but what is the gospel? Like when they get to the gospel, do they know how to share it? And so we developed I developed these icons, which will help people remember, like creation. We start the gospel with creation. God is the creator, and then brokenness, and then, how we try to get to God and how God came to us. And so we have these 8 icons that sort of share the gospel. And now, because of that, we've been able to translate that. I just got back. We just translated it into Russian, and it was spread across 4 nations. I'll be speaking at it at a conference soon. I mean, I'll be preaching at it at church in Florida not long from now. Like, people all over are really hungry, because I know pastors really want their people to be evangelists. And frankly, I think that everybody who loves Jesus wants to be an evangelist. We just need to equip them better. And so I grew up with all these really complicated ideas of sharing the gospel, but now this is how I think. I can't unsee it. I don't have a God conversation until I've had a good conversation, because if somebody's not willing to have a good conversation with me, they're not willing to have a God conversation. But if they're having a God conversation with me, I can make a pretty easy bridge to the gospel. Sometimes that happens. I have a good God gospel conversation all at once in a few minutes. Sometimes it takes a long time because somebody's not ready for that. If somebody's resistant to talking about God at all, there's no way I can get the gospel into their hearts. And so we make this progression, and it's working. We're baptizing people and talking to people about Jesus, and other churches are adopting it too. And I took my name off of it and Church Project name off of it, so anybody can use it, and just use it freely.
Yeah, it's awesome. And as a marketer at the core, I think your model here is basically saying, the church doesn't need marketing. We have people that should be essentially our best marketing resources,
Millions
but they're
of
not
them.
marketers. They're evangelists.
Yeah,
they're
that's right.
disciples. They're living that out, and but you have created a model, and say you church project, and now what you've developed through Good God Gospel has created a resource that any church can use to then take these learnings that have proven to be extremely effective and apply it to your context and to your church. And so I love it, and I hope everyone will go and check that out. Jason, thank you so much for this conversation, and can't wait for the conversations to come.
Thanks, Nils. Appreciate you, man.